All right, so we're picking up in 1 John chapter 4. We've been doing our Periscope where we're looking at the book of 1 John. And today we're going to be looking at chapter 4. So here's a question I want to put out. We got a few people already on. How do you know if something's true or not? Do you remember in school when you used to take those true and false tests? I mean, sometimes I'd get excited about a true and false test because it's like, ooh, if it's true and false, then I don't have to write anything out. Well, if it's written in the Word, okay. Well, that's a great Sunday school answer, and that is true, and I believe that. And that is exactly, as a Christian, where we should start. Anytime somebody tells us something, like say, okay, well, this is truth, or you should do this, or you should do that. That is one of the first places. That is not one of the first places. That is the first place that we should go. We should go to the Scripture and say, okay, what does the Bible have to say about this? How does Scripture teach us? What does Scripture teach about this situation? It's kind of like those true or false things. How to determine if something is true and false. Now, sometimes if it's just a blatant thing that goes against logic, we know that it's false. But a lot of times, it's not true. I remember when I was I got an accounting degree in my undergraduate work, and when I got up into my upper levels of accounting classes, you would take the test, and I hated these types of multiple choice tests because this is what it would say. It would say choose the most correct answer. It wasn't the only correct answer. It was the most correct answer. So you would read a question, and it would have A, B, C, and D. And you would read the question, and you would read A, B, C, and D, and you'd go, well, all of them are right. You had to figure out which one was the most correct. And that made it very difficult. What we have in the Scripture today in the book of 1 John, as John is writing, we look at the first 3 verses in John chapter 4. He starts off by saying, "Dear friends," again, we have this situation where he's always calling us his friends. He's calling the people he's writing to his friends. He says, "Dear friends, do not believe everyone who claims to speak by the Spirit." So it's just right off, just basic. Hey, I know as Christians, we've got to be careful that we don't believe somebody just because they say it's from the Spirit. In fact, if you come to me and you tell me, "Marty, God told me to tell you something," I'm almost going to immediately discount anything you say. A lot of people get in trouble because they believe something from a pastor just because he's a pastor. Or we believe something just because we read it in a Christian book. Or we hear it in church. We should always test everything that we hear. And just because somebody claims something to be true doesn't mean it's true. I love this question to ask back to someone when they tell me something. I'll ask them, "Well, what are you basing that on?" And somebody will tell me something, and I'll say, "Really? Well, what are you basing that on?" And then listen to how often people don't have anything that they're basing that on. So he says, "Dear friends, do not believe everyone who claims to speak by the Spirit," because you can claim all kinds of things and not have anything to back up. He goes on to say this, says, "You must test them to see if the Spirit they have comes from God. For there are many false prophets in the world." We need to be aware of that. Are you aware of that? Are you aware that there's thousands and thousands and hundreds of false prophets, people who are teaching things that are not true? As a pastor, it is my job to teach the Scripture. It's not my job to teach my opinion. It's not my job to teach my experience. It is my job to teach the Scripture based on how the Spirit lays that out for us. And so John is writing. And remember, as John is writing this to new Christians, they don't have a New Testament in front of them. They don't have that. So they're having to try to figure out. You couldn't say at this time, well, you determine if something's true or not. Well, what does the Bible say? Well, they didn't even have the New Testament. So he says, "For there are many prophets in the world." We need to be false prophets in the world. We just need to be aware of that. A lot of times, the biggest part of fighting any battle is knowing who your enemies are and knowing, hey, this is what the issue. There are lots of false prophets out there who are trying to get us to believe and go down a road that's not true. In verse 2, he says, "This is how we know if they have the Spirit of God. If a person claiming to be a prophet acknowledges that Jesus Christ came in a real body, that person has the Spirit of God." Now, what in the world is John talking about here? What is he saying if that person claims that Jesus Christ came in a real body? Well, we've talked about this before. But during the time when the Christianity was beginning, there was a thing out there called Gnosticism. And what Gnostics believed is they believed that the spirit, my spirit being, and my physical being were two separate things, and the two things didn't come together. In other words, I could do whatever I wanted to do with my body, and it didn't impact my spirit. I could do whatever I wanted to do with my body, and it didn't impact my soul. I could do whatever I wanted to do with my body, and it didn't have anything to do with my spiritual life. Now, a lot of people still believe that. You know, that's country music Christianity is what I call it. Because when you listen to country music, what do? They party hard on Saturday night, and they try to get with every girl they can, and they drink, and then they go to church on Sunday and pray and sing. That's Gnosticism. That's what I'm doing with my weekend, and what I say my faith are two different things. And what the Gnostics would say is they started teaching this about Jesus, that Jesus didn't have a real body. Yeah, Jesus was here, and at this point in time, they could say to people, yeah, we know you saw him, but his body wasn't real. And that he really was all spirit. And that sounds crazy to us, but that's what they were teaching. So what John is saying here, how do I know somebody is really of God, somebody's really of the Spirit of God, is if they claim that Jesus Christ came in a real body. And so what do I believe as a traditional Christian? This is what I believe. Jesus was 100% man and he was 100% God. So Jesus experienced everything that we do as human beings. He experienced jealousy, he experienced depression, he experienced joy, he experienced temptation. Now, I believe because he was 100% God, he experienced all of those things and never sinned. So he lived a sinless, perfect life, but he was 100% man and 100% God. And that is the basic fundamental teaching of Christianity. And that's what John is telling us here. He says, listen, if a person claiming to be a prophet acknowledge that Jesus Christ came in a real body, that person has the Spirit of God. Because there were so many false prophets at this time. And what they were telling people is that Jesus didn't have a real body. And what was behind that was, well, Jesus was able to be sinless because he didn't have a real body. Because what they believed was our body was sinful. And since our body is sinful and it's natural to do sinful things, then you can keep doing those natural sinful things. We even hear that today from people. They'll say, well, what's wrong with this? Or what's wrong with this particular sin? Or what's wrong with this particular behavior? And a lot of times their defense is, well, it's natural. Well, natural means sin. And so the Gnostics had a really difficult time of being able to think that Jesus could be sinless, and he could have a real body. And John is saying, listen, if a prophet comes to you and says that Jesus had a real body, and we all know that he had the Spirit, but if he had a real body, then that was a way to know that they were of God and that they were telling the truth. Verse 3 says this, but if anyone claims to be a prophet and does not acknowledge the truth about Jesus Christ, that person is not from God. Now, there's a lot of people who do not have a problem with God, but there's a lot of people who have a problem with Jesus. And so when I want to talk to people and I talk to people about their faith, I want to talk to them about Jesus. I want to talk about, what do you believe about Jesus? Who do you say that Jesus is? Because God is a really big, obviously a really big topic and a really big being, obviously. And you can believe in God and not be a Christian. You can believe in God and not spend eternity in heaven with God. That only comes through a faith in who Jesus is. And here's what John is telling us. That's what John says. But if someone claims to be a prophet and does not acknowledge the truth about Jesus, that person is not forgotten. What truth is he talking about? The truth that Jesus was 100% man, 100% God. He did everything right as a man. He did everything right as a God. Such a person has the spirit of the... he goes on to say, such a person has the spirit of the Antichrist. So if you don't believe that Jesus is everything that he says he is, then you are Antichrist. Now you're not the Antichrist of the book of Revelation, but you are Antichrist. You are against Christ, which you heard is coming into the world and indeed is already here. So they're Antichrist all over the place. Why is this so important? Why is it so important that we understand that Jesus was 100% man and 100% God? I know I'm doing this one, and this is what I'm doing. He's 100% man and 100% God. Why is it so important that we understand that he was both of these things? He's both of these things. Why? Why is this so important? Because if he's 100% God and he's 100% man, then that 100% God part of him allows him to be sinless. The 100% God part of him allows him to forgive me. The 100% God part of him allows him to raise up from the dead and gives me the absolute most amazing hope ever. The 100% man part lets me know that there is nothing in my life that I will ever go through that Jesus hasn't been through. He's faced every pain. He's faced every situation. He's faced every difficulty. And so he knows. He knows what it takes. He knows what we're going through. And we should take great comfort in that. So be aware. Lots of false prophets out there. Lots of people out there who are saying things are not of God. Be wise and ask, what are you basing that on? If they're not basing it on the Scripture, if they're not basing it on Jesus, 100% God, 100% man, then you need to be very careful of what you're listening to and what you're buying into. So those are the first couple of verses of 1 John chapter 4. Continue if you're joining us and you haven't joined to follow us, please do so. You can do that on our community church at Anthem one, or you can do it on Marty Williams. Both of them are there. And if you're in the Anthem area, Henderson area, and you're looking for a church, we meet Sunday mornings at 9:30 and at 11 o'clock at Wallen Elementary School. You can go to our webpage, which I believe is our ACC, or just Google Anthem Community Church in Henderson, and that'll get you there, and it'll tell you the different things about our church and the stuff that's going on. We'd love to get to meet some of you, especially if you're looking for a home church and you live in the Henderson, Las Vegas area. So other than that, I hope you have a terrific weekend, whatever that weekend may involve, and we'll see you guys back on Monday as we continue looking through the book of 1 John. Talk to you soon.